Here we have a picture of Thick Quang Duc, Thich Quang Duc, who on the 10th of June, 1963, committed an act of self-immolation and perished as a result. He was protesting persecution and mistreatment of the Buddhist majority in South Vietnam at the time at the hands of a U.S. backed president who happened to be a Vietnamese Catholic. John F. Kennedy said, "No news, picture in history has generated so much attention around the world as that one." You see, there were lots of such acts during the Vietnam War. Here we have a list. In the 1960s, you can see most of the entries for acts of self-immolation were, in fact, over the Vietnam War. Some in the United States, many in Vietnam, many done by Buddhist monks. It was kind of in vogue in the 70s. You had more Buddhist monks, Buddhist nun here. Women were doing it as well. But that one was done on a busy street at a busy time of day, and there just happened to be photographers there, a couple of them. And I believe I've seen a video of this too, and it's probably on YouTube. But it's too graphic for me. His self-immolation act really shocked people and really got people against what was going on in Vietnam. At the time, the political conversation was, oh, the president of South Vietnam was a bad guy and we need to get rid of him. And John F. Kennedy got rid of him. This single act here, is more than any other act, brought about the end of President Diem. He was ousted in a coup. Don't know if he was assassinated or not, but he was ousted in a coup, and a new puppet regime was put in its place. It also really changed the course of the war in Vietnam and led to increased American involvement and eventually our direct commitment to the war. So this single act of one man really changed the course of history. We had another such act done by this guy more recently, Mohammed Bouazizi. Now this one I remember. He was he owned a food stall. Not sure what city, but I'm guessing Tunis, but could have been anywhere. No, Sidi Boukizi, Tunisia. It's in the middle of the country, so a smaller town. He was frustrated with local officials, police, tax collectors who were extorting him. He was already not doing well. A lot of people weren't doing well at that time. The government of Tunisia, also backed by the United States, very close military ties. I knew people in the military who had relationships with Tunisian military. Very corrupt government. People were unhappy. It had been in power for decades. He got frustrated, and in a spontaneous act of protest, because he was being extorted and they were threatening to shut his little food stall down, in a spontaneous act of protest, he went in front of the public building in that city and set himself on fire and died. And there wasn't even a photograph of this, but it awakened something at the time. And maybe this act was amplified in the press for a specific reason, in order to kick off the Arab Spring. Or maybe this outrage over this act and the conditions that caused it was spontaneous. Lots of acts of self-immolation occur. If we go to recent times, which I haven't heard of any of these, all throughout 2022, 2023, there's an American set himself on fire. Morocco, another guy in Tunisia, Israel, before October 7th. I haven't heard about any of these. So we always have to question why the media chooses to cover some things and not others. I suspect that there was an effort to amplify this for whatever reason, which I won't get into now, and that the Arab Spring was, at least in part, supported in places by Western powers, U.S., but that's a whole different discussion. The Arab Spring spread across the entire Arab-speaking world, from Tunisia all the way to the Arabian Peninsula and up to Turkey and Syria. It was all because of this one man did one thing, one extreme thing. So self-immolation has, in the past, changed the course of history. I was thinking, why is it that this is such a powerful act? Even though I don't agree with it. Certainly. Do not agree with it. I don't think there's any good reason to delete yourself. None whatsoever. It's a sign of anything like that. That's a direct contradiction of the basic instinct of self-preservation. It indicates something going wrong in your brain, but I'm not going to go so far as to say it indicates mental illness. I don't believe that either, or mental disorder, if you want to call it that. But it does indicate extreme desperation, extreme frustration, if nothing else. Hopelessness for sure. But what is it that outrage that why does this act get through to people like no other act of protest? I think it has to do with the fact that it is so extreme that people who see other people do this start to ask themselves, first of all, they grieve for the person who did it. They grieve. Even strangers grieve for this person. Secondly, they start saying, wait a minute, if he's doing that, if he did that, maybe I should be doing something. Not that, not self-immolation, but maybe I should be doing something. If I agree with him, maybe I should be doing something. And I think that's one reason it tends to kick off more action among the populace. It tends to inspire civil disobedience. Another thing is, it's authentic. There's very few people in the world, if any, who would do such a thing for an inauthentic reason, because it constitutes something that will end your time on this earth, and it's an extreme act that would involve extreme pain, perhaps the most painful thing that could possibly happen to you. And human beings have an innate ability to detect authenticity with a fair degree of certainty. And they tend to respond better to authenticity. So the extremeness of the act coupled with the authenticity of the act, triggers a certain part of human empathy. And it's powerful. There's something a little beyond even explanation there. Something spiritual that touches the human spirit. Aaron Bushnell is the latest of these people to commit this act as a political protest. Lots of people have jumped on the bandwagon on both sides. I think it's in bad taste for either side to use this for their own political ends or agenda. My purpose here is to talk about the history, about how this can possibly affect things moving forward. Give some historical examples of why that might be. But looking at Aaron Bushnell, I'm not one to read the New Yorker. It's the first thing I looked up. This is the only picture of that I'm going to show. But what's really amazing about this is this picture went around the world. An extremely close-up picture, very detailed picture. It's the picture that matters more than anything. And his video that he made before as he was walking to the site where he committed that act. Within a week now, about a week later, we got the United States dropping aid out of airplanes into Gaza. In a desperate move, it seems to me, to create the optics that the United States is doing something. The United States government understands, the people within the government understand what kind of situation this is. When people when people self-immolate, they understand that fire can spread. And we saw all sorts of moves made after that. We saw more talks of a peace deal. My opinion, never going to happen. Meanwhile, Israel's continuing on with, for example, the flower massacre that occurred earlier this week, in which Israel opened fire with tanks and small arms on a crowd of people who were trying to get flour out of an aid truck. And then they lied about it, as they are wont, shortly after. But we know that Israel fired upon these civilians who were just trying to get food. And then we have a random, seemingly mostly no glaring mental health issues, who was an officer in the United States Air Force, active duty, I believe. So he has to be reasonably well if he's an officer in the United States Air Force. I don't know what the standards are these days, but they're not going to let a raging drug addict, bum type of schizophrenic person to join the Air Force. I read something that he had an interesting upbringing. He grew up in sort of a religious cult. Big deal. They're trying to, find anything they can use to question his mental capacity. Lots of people grow up in religious cults. The Jehovah's Witnesses is a religious cult. It seems like his protest was authentic. It seems to show a true act, as this New Yorker article says, a true act of political despair. I think it speaks to something more than what's happening in Gaza, however. I've said this before. I think the youth the young people, and I don't consider myself one of them. I'm middle-aged at this point. But the young people are being absolutely crushed and screwed in this country by the boomers. who run this country, who run the institutions, who have all the electoral leverage. And the youth are being left behind and being destroyed, and their future is being destroyed. So I think it's more than just Gaza. But the politicos know this is a big issue. They're taking action. You saw this guy here, Tim Rohn, as a side note. For close watchers of the Israeli-Hamas conflict, which has raged following the militants' October 7th attack, the move to drop aid from the skies signals Biden can't persuade Israeli Prime Minister to do more for suffering Palestinians. What is there to persuade? We simply cut off aid until they do the right thing. It's just that simple. We do it all the time. It's not that hard, people. But yeah, we started the week with this, and we ended the week with this. Airdrops. Really pathetic attempt to paper over what's actually going on, which is U.S. complicity in the war crimes of Israel. But this is not the first time. I predict it's reasonable to assume there will be more such acts. I'm guessing more such acts of self-immolation coming, and I'm guessing they're going to be in the Middle East, in a country like Egypt or Jordan, are two ones I can think of, where civil unrest, civil displeasure is already simmering under the surface, where, for example, in Egypt, the military dictator is really sitting on a thread right now with a horrible economy. I'm not an expert on Egypt, but I have a feeling there is some simmering public anger. Same thing in Jordan. They're trying to please both sides, and as we know, if you try to please both sides, you end up pleasing no one. Just ask Biden about that. The pro-Israel people hate him because he dared make a suggestion that Israel's doing something wrong, and the pro-Palestine people hate him. Try to please everyone, you end up pleasing no one. Let's go to the weekly news roundup. Let's start with Clown World. Let's go down the list like that, but here's the Clown World. I'll do that one since I started it. So apparently, some fishermen found something that they think looks like a balloon off the coast of Alaska. That's all we got right now. They called the FBI. The FBI is going to investigate because when they're not entrapping people, they're investigating hot air balloons. They're heroes, I tell you. Heroes. Israel-Gaza war links here. I put one for Al Jazeera, which I'm not a fan of, but it's the best. It's like a mainstream source. Haaretz for the Israeli side. Read both sides, people. Please read both sides. Haaretz, you need they got a powerful paywall. You need to use an archive service to get through that. Another big story this week, which was really crazy, was New York Times released this article. I say New York Times dictates a confession, but New York Times released an article about a supposed leak to them from the CIA, and what it appeared to me as though the CIA was spilling the beans on some of their activities in Russia, in Ukraine, and on the border of Russia in Ukraine, and it was pretty alarming and quite expansive what they were doing, and really quite a bombshell report. And a lot of people were scratching their heads about why would they do this? Why would they admit all this? And I've heard a lot of good theories and some that I don't agree with. Some people believe that this article was, the CIA had New York Times write this article to help convince members of Congress to pass the $61 billion aid package. Others were saying this is a signal that the United States is drawing down and pulling out of Ukraine. I tend to believe it's almost like a confession in a lot of ways, among other things. So this is their way of confessing. They feel bad because it's almost as if the people in the CIA and State Department actually feel bad about what's happened. And this was their way of confessing to it. Because this has been the CIA's war since before even 2014. The CIA and Ukraine go back, way back, to the beginning of the CIA, to the 1950s, when they supported Bandera, among other people. So the CIA, probably some people who still have a conscience, are actually starting to feel bad that they brought about the deaths of 500,000 people at least. And then if they care about the Russians that died too, then you put that at 600,000, 500 to 600,000 at least. So it's a sign that things are not going well. That's for sure. When the CIA admits to something, that means things are not going well. That's always the case. Show me when that's not the case. I'd be interested to see that. Oregon may recriminalize most drugs due to opioid crisis. Little article about that from the Malaysia Sun. Thought that was interesting. I tend to try to stay away from domestic U.S. news, but I just thought that was funny. There goes the story about Aaron Bushnell. German transport workers launching strikes. This was... What day was this? I think this was towards the middle of the week. March 2nd? No, that's today. Well, that's when it was last updated. I think I found this in the middle of the week. A little short video here. That's not an article. Just saying they're pissed off about pay and working conditions. Yeah, okay. Join the club. At least they have an opportunity to strike. Okay, this was an interesting article. Patagonian governors, so they're pissed off that Malay is withholding funding, government funding. And so what they're going to do, apparently, is, or they may have already done this, is they're going to cut off gas to the capital. So I guess all the gas, natural gas, and some important hydrocarbons come from this part of Argentina. And they're saying that if you don't give us our money, Malay, we are going to not deliver gas. So not sure if that's resolved yet. This was towards the beginning of the week. Google it for more. This was interesting. So ECOWAS basically is reinitiating contact with Guinea. And basically ECOWAS at this point has lifted most of its sanctions against all of the block of resistance here, whether it's Mali. I'm not sure about Mali, but I know Niger, Guinea, Burkina Faso, they all agreed. ECOWAS agreed to let them back in because what it looks like to me is ECOWAS is worried about its own sustainability at this point. So they can't just kick everybody they don't like out. So that's an interesting development and an interesting thing that's happening is ECOWAS realizes it needs these countries where they're not the United States. They can't just sanction people all the time. They have to actually play ball with people. So that's very interesting. Let's see what this one is. No Iranian missiles. Okay, this was the interesting one where Budanov, I should say. I got this from Iranian state media. Budanov, this fucking ugly, gay-looking psychopath. He went kind of rogue this week. He had a couple interviews, and he was saying things like no Iranian missiles being sent to Russia. He also said that they asked him about that guy Navalny, who I don't even want to mention because he's been covered so much in the media. It's just ad nauseum. But the guy, the CIA asset that died in Russian prison, he said, "Oh yeah, he wasn't assassinated." Budanov said he wasn't assassinated. He died of a blood clot. And so it appears as though trying to cover his bases. He understands that things aren't going well, that the West is abandoning them. In this article from the New York Times that I just showed a minute ago, they admitted that he is a CIA asset. They said that the CIA trained them and that he's close to the CIA, which shouldn't surprise anyone who's been paying attention to this. But so he's interesting. He's kind of, maybe he was pissed about that too, that they outed him, right? Although anybody with half a brain would have known that, or would have suspected strongly that. Slovak PM. So this started in the beginning of the week. Slovak PM, what's his name? Fuso? I don't know. Let's see what his name is. Fico. He's the recently elected right wing anti Ukraine funding prime minister, and so basically what happened, and I have two entries to this story. Basically, what happened is Macron called an emergency meeting of European Union or NATO allies, and I guess he was kind of panicking and was like, oh, we need to go to, we might need to go to war with Russia because we're losing this. So apparently Macron has a lot vested in the Ukraine war, probably financially, probably in other ways. And so this story here was like a day before that, this guy went on TV, Fico, and he said, yeah, we're being summoned to Paris and they're going to talk about Europe entering the war in fighting against Russia. So he kind of like spilled the beans and kind of blew the cover of the whole meeting. And then Macron had the meeting, and then basically everybody in NATO, or most people in NATO, said, hell no, we're not going to Ukraine to fight the Russians. And then since then, there's been a lot of intrigue, especially between Macron and Chancellor Scholz of Germany, with a little bit of Russia and UK in the mix. So basically now Scholz is going on TV and he's trying to make his position clear that absolutely no German troops are going to go to Ukraine, if you want to believe that. And then after that, some audio tape recordings of German generals was released to the public, I believe by the Russians. Okay, and a lot of people think that the Russians got those recordings from the UK, by the way, but the Russians released these audio recordings of two German generals talking about destroying the Kerch Bridge, coordinating and working with the Ukrainians to destroy the Kerch Bridge in Crimea, showing direct German involvement. So all of this has been going on. Basically, the whole alliance is falling apart. They're starting to fight each other. It's a big shit show. And we all knew, as anybody who watches my videos knows, I've called this from the beginning. Even before this war started, I said it's going to be an absolute fucking shit show, disaster for the U.S., for Ukraine, and for whoever else gets involved. And at the time, I didn't realize how deeply Europe was going to get involved in this. Okay, so we got Brazil supporters, like 10,000 of them went out to the streets on this was earlier in the week, and they're upset that Bolsonaro is being investigated, indicted for his apparently he had an insurrection. I remember this. It looked a bit too much like January 6th to me. So they're pissed off that, Bolsonaro might get indicted. I remember at the time, the lead up to it, where they were kind of telegraphing in the media that there was going to be an insurrection. And then there was this insurrection, and it just didn't sit right with me. It's like, okay, this is a bit too much like January 6th for me. And then after that, Lula takes over, and the State Department admits that they helped Lula get elected. I believe something like to that effect. It was in a State Department statement. And then after that, there was a lot of misgivings among United States State Department people because Lula didn't back Ukraine, is what it came down to. And so ever since then, Biden and Lula have been at odds. So obviously the United States assisted Lula somehow. I don't know if they pulled another Fed surrection like they did in Washington, D.C., January 6, 2021. So I don't know if they pulled another false flag like that, or if they're just talking about Lula was helped, just with consultants or whatever. I'm not sure. So let's move down here. German police. So this was interesting. German police seize antiquities that were actually stolen in basically in the Syrian civil war. These Western backed, British backed, US backed terrorists that were going around terrorizing the locals and fighting the government of Assad, they were breaking into museums and they were stealing shit, and that stuff ended up in Europe. What's interesting about this is maybe that was part of the deal. Maybe people in Europe were, supporting this because they wanted to get a hold of some of these antiquities. You never know, but these are ending up like these. Looks like a cuneiform tablet. This is really old. You're talking 1000 BC. I think it says, oh wow, 2300 BC. This dates from, and these are stuff like this. This article goes into it. Stuff like this is ending up all over Europe. So there is a pipeline of antiquities that has gone from Syria to Europe as a result of the Syrian civil war. Go figure. Senegal's president agrees to step down, but he doesn't give a date for the election because he hasn't found a successor that he likes yet. So that's interesting. Of course, this president is backed, and whoever he picks is going to be backed by France and the United States. Taiwan's KMT deputy is heading to China for a visit. So the opposition party, the one that favors China more, he's traveling in China, I believe, right now. This was earlier this week, to visit China. Now, what it says here in this article is that he's not going to meet any high-ranking Chinese officials. This is a little thing I wanted to do, Obscure Country Tuesday. I might just do it on any day, where we're talking about Central African Republic. Basically, Russia is involved. UN is involved, and the U.S. Wants to sell private security services. Russia wants to do things. So, Central African Republic, yet another battleground between the United States, Russia, and I don't know if China's involved, but Russia and the United States and China are butting heads in Democratic Republic of the Congo, as I said last week. There's a trade war developing essentially between U.S. and Chinese electric vehicles. Okay, and so what it looks like to me is the United States is trying to block Chinese electric vehicles from entering the United States, saying ridiculous stuff like they're a national security threat. Excuse me. And to me, it looks like just trade protectionism because obviously a lot of these EV companies in the United States are subsidized by the U.S. government, so they don't want China coming in and undercutting U.S. government subsidized companies. That kind of defeats the whole purpose of subsidizing. Corruption scandals cast shadow over Portugal's upcoming election. So this was an interesting article. This is from the United States, basically state news. That's why I call it State News Sunday. Voice of America. But it's a good article nonetheless that goes into detail about the political situation in Portugal. And what's interesting about this is Portugal, like basically the rest of Europe, is having a right-wing populist uprising of sorts. And the two more left-wing parties are both in trouble for corruption. And you have this new right-wing party that's coming in. It's called Enough, with an exclamation point. So they're coming in. So you're seeing this all over Europe. A lot of this has to do with not only COVID policies, but also the inflation, which was a result of COVID policy anyways. And I think the last straw for a lot of people in Europe was the migration also. That's been a long-standing issue. And then finally, the Ukraine war basically was the last straw, and that's why we're going to see over the next few years really just a populist revolution, right-wing populist revolution all across Europe, in most countries in Europe. Let's see here. State News Sunday, Malaysia denounces China. So basically, the Malaysian Prime Minister, he said he denounces China-phobia, and he took control recently, like 2021 or 2022, and he wants to, be nice to China. And of course, the United States is not going to like that. So that is a developing story. Stay tuned for more. We're going to see a lot more. We're gonna hear about more about that as things go on. U.S. China exploring new debt relief options to avoid wave of emerging market defaults. A lot of this has to do with the interest rates worldwide having gone up as much as they have. A lot of countries are in trouble debt-wise, and here we have an example of the United States and China supposedly working together, although they are rivals. So even when they're working together, they're kind of like working against each other, but they're working together to. So basically, the United States has the world's financial system, but China has the money China is the largest creditor nation in the developing world, at least. So that gives China veto power over anything that the United States wants to do, because the China's the one actually handing out the money and loaning the money. So basically, the United States has to work with China. It doesn't really have a choice, and it wouldn't work with China if it didn't have to. South Korea doctor strike. So I'm keeping an eye on this story. This was from earlier this week, and then this was from later this week. So this is the deadline was set for February 29th for the doctors. It's mostly interns. Because the main doctors, so what I read in this article is it's mostly the interns and residents that were boycotting, and still are as far as I know, because the licensed doctors and the practitioners did not want to protest, so they sent the interns and the residents out to protest. And they're protesting basically the fact that they're going to allow South Korea to have more doctors, license more doctors, and they don't want that to happen because it's going to affect their pay. So it's all about greed. But the head doctors, they're staying behind doing their work, and they sent the residents and the interns to protest. The deadline was set for the last day of the month, February 29th, and here we have a little update. South Korea launches legal action to force striking doctors back to work. So I don't even know if I've read this article yet, but I'm going to read this article. I just wanted to get an update, so I just added that article there, and I'm going to leave that article up so I can read it. I'm going to put it over here so I can read that article late in a minute. Okay, here we have nothing major, just Saudi Arabia rubbing noses with Israel, and basically, this just lends credence to the fact, in my opinion. Some would say a theory that Saudi Arabia really doesn't support Gaza or the Palestinians, and they just want to normalize with Israel, and they want business, money, and this is a some people have a name for it. It's a Sykes-Picot regime, or kind of like a legacy of the Hashemites, who were basically working with the British. So the Saudis, let's make history. Let's end this. Well, Saudi Arabia is not going to be able to convince Netanyahu to stop murdering the people of Gaza. That's not going to happen. So I don't know what they're thinking. They probably are trying to get rid of Netanyahu. The Saudis are. Where is this at? I'm trying to find it. Okay. There was a strike, a general strike in Guinea. Basically, people are not happy with the conditions in Guinea right now. Now, this is one of the countries that had a coup. They were the first one, I think, in 2021 to have a coup, and they expect things to be better by now, and they're not. And so there was a general strike. 2 people were shot dead. Not good. They have to do better. As revolutionaries, they have to do better. Farmers clash with police in Brussels. You can read about that here. Russians destroy first M1 Abrams tank. Fantastic. Here we go. We all knew that was going to happen. They tried to delay it as long as possible. I think at this point, the Ukrainians aren't listening to the United States anymore. I'm having a hard time loading this image up. Computer's running really slow as well. I can get it on Telegram, can't I? Computer's running extremely slow right now. Not sure why. It's like I'm got all this going on. What is going on? Let me pause it. Okay, so here's the picture in his Telegram, Megatron's Telegram. That took forever to find. Continuing on. New Delhi raises target for defense exports. So they want to enter the arms market and be a big player in the arms market. They understand that war is going to be increasingly increasing source of revenue. Perhaps eventually the only game in town at this rate. U.S. Coast Guard boards Chinese vessels. So out here what's going on is there's an exclusive economic zone out here in these islands. And Chinese are not, it's supposed to be exclusive just for these islands here, this little island nation. And apparently other nations are coming in and fishing through here. And the U.S. Coast Guard is coming in trying to enforce an exclusive economic zone. And I'm not sure what the particulars of that are. I'll read the article for more. I don't think there's too much information in there actually. So yeah, so U.S. Coast Guard. Majority of countries agree. Okay, so there's another case in the International Criminal Court that predates the October 7th attacks. It's basically saying that Israel is Israel doing apartheid or not? Apartheid is against international law, so that's the issue at hand there. EU will miss key. Okay, so this is funny. So basically, Ukraine's pissed off because the EU promised them, I believe, 500,000 artillery shells by now, and they've only been able to deliver half. And everybody knows it. The EU cannot produce enough artillery shells to help Ukraine out, and we're finding out here right now that that's the case. So there you go. This little story, I'm not sure what I found interesting about this. Sikh MP accuses India-linked agent. So basically, there's some politician there saying that trying to start shit with India. Okay, so that's great. Chad opposition leader killed in army attack. So apparently, what the president of Chad is. This is basically a dictatorship of sorts. I don't know about dictatorship, but the president of Chad is supported by Western governments. His nephew was his main opposition, if I gather correctly from this article. Apparently, members of his nephew's party had an assassination attempt on a Supreme Court justice the day before. So the military came into his house, okay, to do a raid, apparently, and they killed him. So the main opposition leader and the nephew of the president was killed. So this is wild. Gaza health authorities say, yeah, this is the famous incident of a bunch of people at an aid truck in Gaza getting fired upon by the Israelis. People are calling this the flour massacre because they were trying to get flour. Really depraved situation going on. Colombian president says he's going to stop importing weapons from Israel. He's pissed off at Israel. He's probably been under a lot of pressure for a long time to do this. I remember this being an issue months and months ago, and he finally gave in to the pressure. You can bet your bottom dollar he didn't want to do it. I don't. Well, maybe he did, but a lot of members of the government did not want to do that because they rely on Israeli weapons to fight the cartels and the rebel groups. Basically, here we have Fiji. They're unhappy because the United States is subsidizing their fishing. The United States government, Japan's government, all these governments are subsidizing fishing companies, and these fishing companies are coming in here to their fisheries, and they're basically cleaning them out. And the local fishing companies can't compete because they don't have the money that these big subsidized companies have. So there's a dispute at the World Trade Organization going on. I don't know if it's an official dispute, but this was mentioned at the WTO meeting, which happened in Abu Dhabi. That they want to see a cap on subsidies so that their fisheries can be at least marginally competitive. So it's another case of the United States being dickheads. So what else is new? India's economy grows most in several quarters. So this is just an article on the performance of the Indian economy. Good for Modi. Good for Modi's re-election, which is coming soon. So Modi's probably going to win in a big way. And manufacturing's growing. They say the rural economy kind of sucks. But other than that, India's looking good. India's getting big. Do they have a bigger population than China already? I think they're close, if not surpassing China in terms of population. Let's see. Basically, the Colombians, so migration through the Darien Gap is cut off following the capture of boat captains Colombia. So basically, I mentioned this in a video not too long ago, maybe a few months ago when I was doing, before I stopped doing the videos for a while. There's a big cottage industry here around the Darien Gap for getting migrants across into on their way up to the United States. And the Colombian government came in and basically busted some boat captains that were ferrying people across this right here, this little spot of water. This is where they start their journey, and they go over to San Francisco, it seems like. And then they start going up the trek into the Darien Gap, which is really crazy that they do that. So here we have a story of an American citizen, Palestinian woman who was released on bail pending a trial. And just what really got me about this is obviously the United States pulled strings here. She's probably a resident of Dearborn, Michigan, or whatever. And but we saw what happened to Gonzalo Lira. So if they can pull strings with the Israeli government, why couldn't they have pulled strings with the government in Ukraine and saved Gonzalo Lira's life? And I'll tell you why. It's because that the United States government, the State Department, wanted him dead. So this should alarm every American that their government is willing to basically murder their own citizens if they get out of line, which is really insane. So, but they helped her out because she's on the right side of politics, at least marginally on the right side of politics, because she's pro-Palestinian. And Biden's base, Biden is trying to walk that fine line, please everybody, like I said earlier, while actually pleasing nobody. Ghana's parliament didn't pay its electric bill, and it was cut off from electricity. They also had another story where they have like an anti-LGBTQ bill, and the United States is pissed off about that. There's a lot of African Americans that go to Ghana. It's one of the more Americanized parts of Africa. So that's what's another interesting thing about Ghana. So Vietnam, basically, they're taking steps, and this is basically propaganda. So let's be real, but basically, there was a report released by an NGO that's complaining about Vietnam taking steps to fortify their society from American subversion. And so there was a letter released in the Communist Party of Vietnam, or some Directive 24, I think it's called. And that's according to this NGO that wrote this report. The report is right here, which is going to be, who is this, 88 group or something, Project 88. So whatever, probably a CIA cutout. They're upset that Vietnam's trying to protect their civilization. Basically, there's a lot of headway being made because the United States wants Vietnam to be its next slave labor market, because they don't want to use China anymore, I guess. And so essentially, they're pissed off that Vietnam is taking steps to protect their society from United States subversion and all that. So that'll be a story we got to keep an eye on, see what's going to happen there. So this was an interesting story. Basically, Cuba. There was a woman that was arrested, a man, a former. This guy was actually high ranking, State Department guy. I don't know if that's him, but it looks like him because I saw a picture of him. There was a State Department guy, Colombian-born, U.S. citizen, who he rose really high. He was an ambassador or deputy ambassador. He was in CENTCOM or Southcom, which was a military command, and apparently the FBI busted him. They did basically a sting on him. They could say they randomly called him. They said, "Hey, we're from Cuba and we've been ordered to talk to you." Because somebody obviously tipped the FBI off that this guy was spying, and this guy went and met with the informant, and they basically busted him. And it doesn't look, I read some of the complaints. The indictment is sealed, but I read some of the complaints, and it does appear that the guy admitted to working for the Cuban government, according to what I can see. Although more reading might be required to know. At first, I thought this was entrapment, but then it became he started talking like he had been working for the Cubans. So this guy was a pretty high-ranking guy. It's pretty interesting. And so this article is saying that Cuba's saying that the U.S. Invented this whole story. I read the complaint, and if the complaint's true, probably not. It's probably had some contacts with the Cubans, something to do with Cuba. It may not have been the Cuban government. I don't know. But the complaint's on, you can find the complaint if you have access. Anybody has access to Pacers. You can get on there. You can look this case up and check it out. So I'm leaning towards the side of this guy was La Rocha, I think his name was Rocha, last name Rocha. He was actually doing something with somebody in Cuba, giving somebody in Cuba information. So basically, Barbecue Cherizier, they call him a gang leader. He's kind of a revolutionary. He's kind of like walks the line between those two. They did an attack on. So Haiti's actually getting interesting. It's been interesting for a while. So Barbecue Cherizier did an attack on the police station in Port-au-Prince. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to shut down the police in Port-au-Prince because the president of Haiti is over in Kenya. And they're trying to create a new agreement for Kenyan police to go to Haiti because the Kenyan Supreme Court shot down the last agreement. They said the agreement needed to be reciprocal, which means I guess both sides have to give each other something. That's what it sounds like to me. So now the president of Haiti is back in Kenya trying to renegotiate a deal that would be legal under Kenyan law. And during that time, while he was gone, there was an attack on the police station. The idea was to take over the police station so that the president doesn't come back to Haiti. That was the idea. It didn't work, but it was interesting. So they call it a gang, but Barbecue Cherizier is not a gang. I don't see him as a gang. From what I can tell, he's more like a revolutionary type of person. Nicaragua files case at World Court against Germany for aiding Israel. This is the actual complaint right here, or the document, so can read that. So they're saying that, Germany is aiding Israel, and that's contributing to genocide, and that's illegal under international law. So here we have. I did a pod. I'm going to do like a podcast Saturday, and this is Defense Politics Asia talking about Singapore. Basically, they're saying that we can't rely on the United States anymore. We're going to have to build our own military. And one of the ministers said that there's going to be. We believe there's going to be a good chance that there's going to be a major war within the next 10 years. And according to Walt of Defense Politics Asia, these people are serious. They don't just say that shit to make people afraid. They actually believe that. What happened here? The ship that was struck a couple weeks ago. It was a fertilizer ship from under the flag of, I don't know what flag it was under, but it was a British ship. It finally sunk. What's interesting about this is they complain about the environmental effects of this because oil got in the water, but then no one ever mentions how much environmental impact the Nord Stream pipeline had, which was significant because it was the largest release ever of methane into the atmosphere. What do we have here? Thousands protest. So, speaking of the guy, back to Tunisia, there is civil unrest in Tunisia. So apparently, the current president of Tunisia, took over not too long ago, and the people are, unemployment. President Said took power in July 2021 in a power grab, and he rammed through a constitution that gave his office unlimited powers and neutered parliament. So people are not liking what's going on over there. So that's interesting. What else do we have? Let's fly through the rest. U.S. says it takes serious. Okay, so there was again with Singapore, this guy Kaplan. Basically, he's being investigated. He's a real piece of shit in Singapore. His staff is complaining about him. He doesn't properly file his expenses. He uses fear and intimidation, direct threats of reprisal. And it's funny, just a sign of the times. But what I found really crazy is if you go to this guy's, Wikipedia entry, this guy was an entrepreneur. He was president and CEO of Sega, I think. GeoWorks, Sega, some digital technology thing. Flip Video, which was acquired by Cisco Systems. And he was a CEO of, most recently, a CEO of Fish Six Corporation, a holding company that owns several grilled cheese sandwich restaurants in California, Texas, and Colorado. So why do we have a guy who is an entrepreneur that ran restaurants, grilled cheese restaurants at that? I mean, who does a grilled cheese restaurant? Really? Are we doing grilled cheese restaurants? What's that about? And this guy's being sent to be our ambassador to Singapore, which is not an insignificant country economically. Wild. So maybe he had connections there. I don't know, but it seems like not the type of person. No diplomatic experience. No historic. I mean, he's not a diplomat. What are you doing? What are we doing? Pointing. So it's obviously like a patronage thing, a nepotism or patronage thing, something like that. Back to we did that one already. Gaza war, Oman. This is a story from Mideast Eye about a boycott of American products in Oman. Apparently, it's actually pretty effective, and McDonald's is losing money, Starbucks is losing money, no one's buying soda. They're probably going to live longer as a result. Oh, this is an interesting one. Israeli defense minister, as of today, this story came out. He's going to Washington, D.C. and talking to D.C. and then to London without the approval of Netanyahu. So apparently Netanyahu's furious about this. Is this him trying to pave the way for a change in leadership, maybe with himself at the head? what's really going on here. Apparently, he's a centrist. Okay, I don't care if you're a centrist, a right winger, or a left winger in Israel. Okay, the whole political system, the whole political. They all believe in mistreating the Palestinians, and they all believe in the apartheid regime at minimum, and none of them are any good. So what they want to do here is they want to kind of try and calm this whole situation down ahead of the election. They are desperate to stop this situation before the election. So they're going to try and get rid of Netanyahu, put somebody in his place and say, hey, look, he's not Netanyahu and he's a left winger, so he's good, right? And the same shit's going to continue. It's not going to work. And then I put a podcast of the Duran where they're talking about Lavrov's trip to Latin America. So that is it. I am out like Flint.